Hi everyone and welcome. My name is Jessica Bune and I am the National Disability Coordination Officer for the Sydney region, and the NDCO program is funded by the Federal Department of Education, Skills and Employment to improve the transition of people with disability in tertiary education and subsequent employment. So today's webinar is live captioned, and a very warm welcome to our captioner Saula from Bradley Reporting. To access the captions, there is a CC button, which is located on the toolbar either at the top or at the bottom of your screen. And captions are also available by web browser. The link, I believe, is either in the chat box already or will be added shortly into the chat box. So before we do begin the webinar today, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of Australia and recognise their continuing connection to land, water and culture. Today, I am currently on the land of the Camaragal people, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And I further acknowledge the traditional owners of country on which you are on today. And I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I respect Aboriginal heritage and culture and the ongoing relationship that traditional owners have with the land. So today's webinar is presented by Kate Halpin from Specialisterne, on the topic of the neurodiverse workforce, tips for navigating your post-university employment journey. Before I do introduce Kate, though, I'm just going to go through a few housekeeping details with everyone. So throughout the session, we really do invite your questions. If you have any questions at all, please do pop them into the Q&A box, which is in your Zoom control panel. We'll have some time at the end where we'll go through everyone's questions, and of course, all questions are very warmly welcomed. If at any stage you have any technical issues throughout the webinar, please do email my lovely colleague Rob at r.leggo@westernsydney.edu.au. So if you're unable to access the Q&A box, for example, please do email Rob with any questions, and he'll jump in a bit later to pass those on to Kate. Now, I believe Rob's email address is also in the chat box as well, so that you can refer to it a little later on if you need to. So today's session is being recorded. It will be uploaded to the Pathways to Employability website over the next few days. And the Pathways to Employability series has been a collaborative event between the NDCO program and university partners to provide students with disability with information to support career development strategies to undertake successful transition into graduate employment. So whether you're joining us today for the first time as part of the Pathways to Employability series, or whether you're here and you've come along to some of the sessions that we've had over the previous weeks, a warm welcome to you. And I certainly hope that you enjoy the session today. Now to introduce Kate, I'm just going to stop sharing my screen. There we go. Welcome, Kate. So Kate, you're a consultant at Specialisterne Australia, working with organisations to create inclusive environments and challenge some of the traditional recruitment processes, amongst a number of other things that I know you're going to be talking to us today. Welcome to you. It's lovely to have you here. How are you?
I'm really well. Thank you, Jess, obviously, for the warm introduction, and yeah, really honoured to be invited to present here today.
Well, thank you. And I am going to hand over to you. I'm going to disappear into the background, but I'll pop back a little bit later to go through some of the Q&A questions with you. So over to you, Kate. And
wonderful. Thank you so much. All right, I'm going to share my screen now, so it won't be one moment whilst I'm just doing that. Fantastic. So hopefully everyone can see that presentation page now. Obviously, please do let me know if you can't see that. But again, welcome to today's session. I'm really privileged to have been invited to present here today, and really grateful that you've given up your time to attend this session. The focus, or the topic for today's session that we're going to talk about, is the neurodiverse workforce. So tips for navigating your post-university employment journey. Oh, sorry, we've skipped a fraction ahead there. I apologise. Excellent. So the agenda for today. So some of the different things we're going to talk through today are who is Specialisterne. So some of you may be familiar with us, but there may be many of you listening in today that have never heard of us before. What we know about autism and employment, building employers' autism awareness and capacity, neurodiversity as a competitive advantage, understanding your strengths, disclosure in the workplace, and also we'll touch on some of the upcoming Specialisterne employment opportunities that we have in the horizon. All right, so firstly, who are we and what we believe? So perhaps some of you might have noticed in the backdrop of my screen when I'm talking, you might be able to see, it's a little bit blurry, I know, but it is a picture of a dandelion. And the dandelion is the Specialisterne logo. And the question I have back to you is, from your perspective, is a dandelion a weed or a herb? So most people don't know that when cultivated, the dandelion is one of the most valuable plants in nature. And that's why the dandelion is our logo, as we recognise that we can all realise our potential if we are welcomed and understood. So Specialisterne. So the organisation I work for, Specialisterne, is actually a global organisation. So we're now in 14 countries worldwide. Here within Australia, we were established back in 2015. So still fairly new, but we've done some pretty amazing things in such a short period of time. But our founder, Thorkel Sonner, that you can see in the left-hand side of the screen here, he did actually establish Specialisterne, which translates to the specialists, back in 2004. And Thorkel himself actually has a son on the spectrum, and many years ago he was told from specialists that basically to be aware and brace yourself now that his son, who was also on the spectrum, really there wouldn't be a lot for him to look forward to in life. Perhaps if he was lucky enough to finish education, his high school education, that is, that, the prospects were very minimal, that he probably wouldn't go on to any, higher education, let alone work. And Thorkel basically walked away from some of those appointments and went, well, that's nonsense. I know my son better than anyone else. I've seen firsthand the amazing strengths and capabilities that he has, and hence founded what we now have today as Specialisterne. And we were actually the first company in the world to pioneer what's now known as the Autism at Work and Autism Advantage movements. And we promote neurodiversity in the workplace because of the benefits to business. So it's no longer just about ticking a box. Obviously, it's fantastic, and we all want to see a rise in the statistics and the numbers of individuals with a disability that are employed within the workplace. But this is also taking that one step further and actually realising that by tapping into the autism advantage and having a neurodiverse workforce, that there's actually some really great competitive business advantages as well for those employers. And I want to bring your attention as well to that point I've got on the slide here, our global goal. So we do have a rather ambitious global goal, and that is to facilitate 1 million meaningful careers by 2030. And I say meaningful because it's not just about ticking a box or a short-term casual role or a short-term internship. This is actually about the start of a meaningful career. The candidates that come through our program are often highly intelligent, work-ready individuals, some of which have gone on and completed higher university studies, but because of some of the barriers that currently exist, they just can't get themselves a job. And that's a lot about what we're going to talk about in today's session. So obviously 1 million careers by 2030, that's the global goal. Here within Australia, our portion of that is 12,000 by 2030. So still rather ambitious, but we're getting there and we're moving forward every year. So as I said, 12,000 meaningful careers by 2030, and we are going to encourage businesses to realise the autism advantage. And how do we do that? The key piece for us is enabling employers. So Specialisterne spends quite a lot of time and work actually with the employers rather than, I guess, some perhaps of our competitors or other people in the market offering similar services may come from a different approach. But with Specialisterne, we really want to work with employers. We want them to understand the genuine value and strengths that individuals on the spectrum can bring to the workforce. And we do that by that enablement, that capacity building and that training piece. All right, so what do we know about autism employment? So autistic individuals are willing and able to work, with research showing that they can have higher than average abilities in many areas. Traditional recruitment practices create significant barriers for autistic job seekers, and as a result, most autistic individuals don't progress past the interview process. Facilitating specific autism talent pathways into open market employment with businesses and governments will provide meaningful career pathway opportunities to individuals who are currently being excluded due to barriers. I've got a few interesting statistics here. So if I bring your attention to the bottom left, so 45% of autistic people report their skills are higher than those required to perform their current job. 20% of autistic individuals report that they have lost a job due to the fact that they're on the spectrum. And as I said, and then on this top right one, a really key piece here, I think really important given the audience here in attendance today. So we have this large cohort of individuals who are overeducated and unemployed. And I said that ties into that statistic about the fact that we're aware that many individuals, and particularly those that come through our program, have got university degrees, sometimes multiple, yet they cannot get a job. And as a result, because we all need money to survive and to thrive in society, perhaps end up being, taking on a job that perhaps doesn't utilise their skill sets and their strengths and their qualifications, and also perhaps for someone on the spectrum doesn't set them up to succeed because of perhaps, where they might have challenges with sensory sensitivities. For example, working somewhere like in a fast food chain, for a lot of individuals on the spectrum, that's going to be a really difficult environment to thrive in, not to mention that they're not utilising those university qualifications either. So what are some of the problems with traditional recruitment and interview processes? So first of all, we know that for a lot of individuals on the spectrum, there are some challenges with, for example, communication and nonverbal communication skills. So many candidates that come through our program, they do have some challenges, for example, with maintaining eye contact, sometimes touch, reading that nonverbal behaviour as well. And you think about if you've ever been for an interview process, it's all about rapport building. From the moment you meet, the hiring manager or the person conducting that particular interview, it is about putting your hand out, shaking the hand, maintaining eye contact, engaging in small talk. And they are realistically some of the challenges that many individuals on the spectrum face and where they don't necessarily thrive in that type of environment. Interviews require you to sell yourself and really talk yourself up, whereas in my experience, a lot of the individuals I support who are on the spectrum actually suffer from what we term imposter syndrome and don't realise that the amazing strengths and skills that they have are often not what the average neurotypical individual can do. But because they've always been able to do that, or it just comes so naturally, they don't realise that's actually an amazing skill that they have and definitely an asset to employees. In an interview, you've got to think fast on your feet. Sometimes these days, employers are trying to be a little bit more creative, and you might be doing some group work and some scenario-based activities. Again, for anyone, let alone perhaps for someone on the spectrum, it's going to create a little bit of anxiety, perhaps the unknown, and it's going to create an environment again where individuals on the spectrum aren't going to prosper. And the other interesting part is that for many individuals on the spectrum, and perhaps for yourselves listening in today, you might have had an attempt yourself at going for some roles and been through the interview process. But what we see as well is that for a lot of individuals on the spectrum, resumes alone can create a barrier. And we think about how competitive the job market is. And now more than ever with COVID, where many individuals who were working perhaps have lost their job or lost hours, it's going to become even more of a challenge. And, my background actually before coming into the autism space was in HR. So I've been on the other side where I've been inundated for roles and, sometimes 200, 400 plus, and you've got to go through each one and quite quickly make a decision. And you look at a resume and you do start to look at, the key pieces of information you're looking for. But for someone on the spectrum, sometimes the resume doesn't really showcase the skills. It doesn't allow in that environment. Some individuals, as I gave that example earlier, perhaps have gone through and got a university qualification, but they've just been unable to get a job. And as a result, they've had to go into a role that doesn't utilise their skills. But perhaps for someone picking up a resume, you can see someone's applying for a job that perhaps fits their qualification from that perspective, yet they've had a handful of other jobs that are in no way related to the role that they're going for. Perhaps it's also quite patchy. That example I gave before about perhaps someone on the spectrum working in a fast food chain. In my personal opinion, there's absolutely nothing wrong with fast food chains. And I think, organisations such as McDonald's are wonderful and give so many, individuals that start to a career and sometimes a long-term career. But again, often for someone on the spectrum, that's going to be a really difficult environment to thrive. You think about fact that it's fast-paced, you're dealing with customers, the unknown, sensory sensitivities is going to be a lot of heat, smells, perhaps the requirement to wear a uniform. But again, if someone's got this university qualification, they've worked at McDonald's for 3 months and it hasn't worked out because it isn't the right environment, and perhaps they haven't been supported or they haven't disclosed, then we get a patch on the resume. Then they might try something else, but again, not the right environment, and we get a patch on the resume. From a HR perspective or a hiring manager perspective, if you're suddenly looking at that resume and you start to see all these gaps and patches quite quickly when it's already such a competitive process, you're going to probably disregard that resume. So straight away, you've got that first barrier. And as I said, if you are lucky enough to get invited to an interview, then as I've just pointed out, the interview itself creates so many barriers. And that's why Specialisterne is a little bit different, because we're basically flipping that recruitment process, that traditional recruitment process on its head, because we realise that is creating barriers for individuals who are on the spectrum. So I have a little video I'm going to play in just a moment. Sam Castleman has come through one of our programs previously. He is on the spectrum, and he's going to tell you a little bit about his journey to trying to find work, some of the hurdles that he has, and now the positive impact that having permanent employment over at IBM has had on him. I think you'll find it quite powerful. But I'll just read this statement on the left here, because I think, again, Sam's words, really resonated with me and perhaps with you too. So Sam's story. So I think the biggest lesson to take away is to embrace who you are. We may not be able to perform the same tasks as neurotypical people, but that's okay. And as the world comes to understand us and accept us more, there's value in what we can do. And it's just a matter of time until you find the right place, the right people who accept you for who you are. I'm just going to play this video now, and obviously please let me know if there's any audio connections and you can't hear it.
Hey, y'all going?
I'm good.
At the moment, I start the day at 9 a.m. I do some work until 9:30 when I have my daily meeting with my team. We'll discuss what we've got on for the day. It's been a bit annoying trying to do remote work on a Windows computer. My name's Sam Castleman. I'm a blockchain developer at IBM here in Ballarat, and I am on the autism spectrum. Have you ever come back to the exec dash? The mobile app's written in React Native now, so you might actually be able to help. So my opportunity with IBM started with a hiring program I found about through a friend.
3, 2, 1, go.
I just applied, not expecting too much, and eventually I was one of the 10 offered the final position.
And we'd like to offer you a job.
I'm not sure what to say.
That's all right. It's been 11 months since Sam joined us at IBM.
Really keen to actually get back on it with a good idea this time.
I'm doing stuff in React.
Sam has really grown in his confidence, and he's so appreciative and he so values the fact that he can now contribute to the world. He's brought in some different ways of thinking.
It seems simple enough at first, and then it's like, oh, it's actually in like this totally different class. Oh, we shouldn't be using this. Before working at IBM, I hadn't actually had any proper employment, and that wasn't for lack of trying. Being on the spectrum carries a lot of stigma. I handed out over 150 resumes across Ballarat and Melbourne looking for any work, and of the few interviews I actually got, none were successful. People on the spectrum, or people with neurodiverse conditions in general, have unemployment rates up to 70%, and that does come down to an inability to perform standard tasks in a way expected of employers. I've got a couple of PBIs to finish before I roll off Friday.
Well, the first one was the girls the morning of the wedding.
I think everything since about 3 years ago has been totally different to what I ever expected. So this time last year, Carly was my fiance of a year and a half, and after joining IBM in November of last year, we finally got married. And that was hugely due to the financial stability provided by my job, as well as a general mental health increase.
Oh no, it would be such a shame if someone was to knock down my house.
Look out! So particularly post-COVID, things have been very different. I'm working from home and have been for a few months now, and it's been really good to be home with my family more. My daughters have been very happy to see me for most of the day now. There we go.
Where does this person live, Zelda?
Since Sam got the job, It's been a bit of a whirlwind. So many things have happened and he's changed in so many ways.
Oh no!
He's extremely focused. So if he finds something that he is passionate about or he clicks with, you won't be able to take him off it until he figures it out. He is one-track mind, he can get it done.
In terms of Sam, it's a very bright future. You know, to see those things quite quickly change over that period of time, that's what employment does. It gives confidence to come out of themselves, push their limits, and really be feeling part of society.
Didn't we go to the shop yesterday?
So I think the biggest lesson to take away is to embrace who you are. We may not be able to perform the same tasks as neurotypical people, but that's okay. And as the world comes to understand us and accept us more, you know, there's value in what we can do. And it's just a matter of time until you find the right place, the right people who accept you for who you are.
Not today, darling.
All right, so hopefully, you found that quite insightful. Obviously a very happy ending from that perspective, but you would have heard there, Sam mentioning over 150 applications before he came through something like this. And now he really has, in a way, even become the IBM pin-up person because of the amazing impact that he's had within his team. And he's just going from strength to strength, which is, so very exciting for him. All right. So Specialisterne, again, as we've spoken about earlier, we do have this, rather ambitious goal for 1 million meaningful careers by 2030. We've obviously had to think about how we're going to do this. So we do focus on two key groups. So we have the employers and the industry group, and then we have obviously the individuals on the spectrum that are seeking employment as well. But as I mentioned earlier, Specialisterne does place quite a lot of emphasis actually on that first group, on that employer and industry group, because we realise that enablement piece, that capacity building piece is vital for that flow-on effect, so that we do start to see a rise in the numbers of individuals on the spectrum represented within the workforce. So how do we do that? So Specialisterne has quite a unique process. So we talked earlier about the fact that traditional recruitment processes do create a lot of barriers for individuals on the spectrum. So what we do is we have completely removed that process, thrown it out the window, so to speak, and we've divided it up into into 5 key stages. So if we look here, for example, at stage 1, that's where we identify roles and understand the workplace. So before we even come to running a program, we've often been in discussion with the employers for quite a long period, often a minimum of 12 months. We really start those discussions, for us personally, to understand about the culture of the organisation, because that's so important. We start right then, that capacity building and awareness piece. So we start going through training on the benefits of a neurodiverse workforce, understanding autism, more of the general awareness type sessions, but then understanding that autism advantage piece as well, which is so crucial towards this long-term success. We start to work with the employer as well to really knuckle down and to understand the types of roles that they have available. We often look for roles that are perhaps quite hard to fill, or where the employer's seen a high turnover, perhaps roles as well that can be quite repetitive in nature. And whilst we did initially start working, say, within predominantly the IT space, over the last year or so, we've actually started to expand outside of IT. The reason we started in IT is because it's what we call a safe landing space. So we just find stereotypically that a lot of individuals on the spectrum that come through our programs did have a strong fascination and interest with IT. So we knew that if we're engaging with employees, particularly for the first time, that we're going to get a really strong success rate engaging in roles that are within the IT space. But thankfully now we've had a lot of employers come back for repeat programs. We can get a bit more creative, and we're starting to really expand outside of that IT space. And again, I'll talk about that a little bit later as well. But in this stage 1, that's where we really start to understand the roles. We'll give some honest feedback. Sometimes employers come to us and they go, "We've got this role. What do you think?" And we'll go, "Look, to be honest, I don't think that is suitable, to the success of someone on the spectrum." Or we might say, "Great, but are we able to do some job carving? Are we able to change a few things within this job description as well?" And that's so important about getting that fundamental stage, right, about getting the job, the right job for the individuals that are perhaps going to come through our program. Right back in stage 1 as well, we start to engage with potential hiring managers. We don't want people to be tapped on the shoulder and told, surprise, you're going to be part of the Specialisterne program. We want people that, in the opposite effect, actually put up their hand. They perhaps are aware of Specialisterne, or perhaps they have some connection with autism themselves, perhaps a son or daughter on the spectrum, or a family member, a neighbour, a friend. These days, so many people are connected in some way, shape or form to autism. So we want people to want to be engaged in our program, because again, that key to success, in our opinion, is having an understanding manager. You know, we know that the candidates that come through our program are exceptional and have these amazing talents. If we can put these individuals into the right role, we're going to have success. But it's vital from the start to have a manager that's engaged and wants to see them thrive. So that all happens in stage 1 before we've even announced a program that we're running. Then we move to stage 2, so the candidate sourcing stage. So we're very fortunate. We have a mailing list at the moment with over 2,000 individuals on the spectrum subscribed. Perhaps there's providers, mothers, fathers, carers as well. So when we have a program, one of the first things we do is we disseminate that information via our mailing list. So if you're not already on our mailing list, if you do go to the Specialisterne Australia website, on the very first landing page, if you scroll down slightly, there is a link that says subscribe to our mailing list. I'll also have the link details later in today's presentation. But basically, we disseminate that information through that mailing list. We're also very active on our social networks as well. So we are active on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook as well. And we're very, very grateful that the autism community is so supportive of each other. And even some of our, I say it in loose terms, competitors, we all are, I guess, thriving for that same goal. We all just want to see the number of individuals on the spectrum represented a lot higher than what it is currently. So everyone seems to come together and helps to disseminate that information, to share the opportunities that we have. So we end up having a really far reach, which is fantastic. So as part of this program, we've talked earlier about the fact that, traditional recruitment processes create barriers because we're relying on resumes, we're relying on interviews. So again, we've thrown that out the window. So when candidates want to apply for a role or a place within our programs, what we actually get them to do is complete an online application form. And that online application form will prompt the applicants to enter some information that's allowing us to see firsthand, just through their responses, some of their skills, what their interests are, if they have completed any further education, if they've completed their own self-education. We find so many candidates that come through our program haven't necessarily gone on to further education since perhaps completing high school, but they have a particular area and an interest area and a fascination in a particular path, and it's amazing. Some of their their strengths and understanding of particular areas sometimes is on par or even exceeds those that have actually gone through and done formal education pathways as well. So we don't rule anything out. If you have done previous volunteer work or paid employment, anything like that, this is our information capturing stage. So we prompt our applicants to provide us with as much information as possible. And then we will, again, rather than doing, in a traditional recruitment process, the pre-screening via the phone, again, that's obviously not going to work very well for someone on the spectrum. So we have removed the pre-screening process that perhaps traditionally is done by the phone, and any candidates that we feel perhaps have some strong potential for our program, we'll invite them to what we call a pre-selection workshop. Often, because we're quite fortunate that we get inundated for our programs, we often run 3 to 4 of these pre-selection workshops as well, and they're a one-day workshop as well. So often they're kind of 9 till 4. Pre-COVID, they used to be classroom-based, but COVID's made us innovate on our own traditional processes, I guess. And in 2020, we've had a lot of success running our programs 100%, virtually online as well. So, it's great. I was actually chatting with Jess prior today saying that, now we've got even further reach for us personally, and we've got applications coming from interstate, from rural areas as well, where perhaps there hasn't been opportunities, but now employers are also a little bit more willing perhaps to allow, successful employees to work remotely as well. So at least there's been something positive from that perspective that's come from a very tough year for many. So when we have our pre-selection workshops, as I said, they're often run over a series a day. The successful candidates that are invited to that stage participate in a workshop 9 till 4, and we get the candidates that come through that to demonstrate their skills in a practical capacity. So there's no selling yourself and talking about what you can do. We want you to show us what you can do, and the practical activities that you'd be involved with and the practical tasks are relevant to the available jobs. So it's all very relevant, and for some individuals, they surprise themselves and perhaps they've come in for a particular role in mind, but they've got some amazing talents in other areas as well, so they may end up putting their hand up, so to speak, for a few other roles that are available within that program piece as well. We then make the very difficult decision to try and cut down that cohort from the pre-selection groups into our final program group, and that's where we progress to stage 3, which is the training and assessment program. So similar in a way to that pre-selection workshop, but this is actually often over a 2 to 4 week period. Again, pre-COVID, it was all classroom based. You saw in the little video with Sam some of our Lego robotics that we often utilised in work as well. But again, COVID's made us innovate. So we haven't been using Lego all year actually. We've been doing some really cool online activities, again, relevant to the role. We've had employers still engaged every step of the way. So we have those hiring managers coming in and doing drop-in sessions in that training and assessment program. So they get to know the candidates that are coming through. They get to see the candidates demonstrating their skills in that practical capacity. Often at the end of the week, we'll get the candidates in the program to actually present what they've been working on in the week. So they really do start to build a rapport with the employers, but in a way that's not too confrontational as well. And it's almost often a twist in that traditional recruitment process, where at times we actually find it's the candidates almost interviewing the employers and saying, why should I work for you? Which is really lovely. And pretty much every single program we run, we have a handful of candidates that are wanted by several hiring managers. It's almost like a bit of a bidding war, and it's so exciting to see that flip, because these hiring managers have that light bulb moment from participating in our program. They see the exceptional strengths that these candidates have in real time that are relevant to the role, and we love that. We love that. That's when we love our jobs, but when we see that light bulb moment happen, that's why we do what we do as well. So at the end of our, what we call that training and assessment program in stage 3, so obviously the employers have been actually involved in participating in the program, but we then also provide them with a report on each of the candidates, and we outline fairly clearly where their strengths are, in our opinion, and also some of their role suitabilities as well. But ultimately it's the employer that will offer roles to the candidates. But before they get to that stage, what we do as well is we ask the employers to invite any candidates they see potential in to what we call a day in the life. Again, pre-COVID, that was done on site in an office. Some of the employers we've been engaged in this year have still been able to do that, obviously being safe in their social distancing and so forth. And what that would normally look like is the employers will actually invite what we'd call, say, the shortlisted candidates or any candidates they see potential in for the role to the workplace. So it allows those candidates to actually see the workplace. Is it an environment where they are going to feel comfortable in, where they're going to thrive? They get to meet their potential teammates. They get to sit in and observe a team meeting. They can perhaps shadow one of their colleagues, and we often also get them still to participate in some practical activities again that are relevant to the job to really help the hiring manager make their final decision. And again, COVID hasn't stopped that from happening either. So everything I've just mentioned can be done online. These days, that's what work's like. So, it's still that engaging via a teleconference in the team meeting and working out. We've seen some amazing shadowing happening with technology as well. Obviously, it's a little bit difficult when you can't step foot in the office environment. But in saying that, the world around us is changing, and some individuals that come through our program may actually be interstate or in remote areas, of Australia, where they aren't in a commutable distance to the office. And if that's agreed by the employer, for some individuals, they may never step foot in the office. So once our offers are made to those successful candidates, we start the onboarding. And again, that's such a crucial piece for us and with the employer again about that awareness to actually know how to set someone on the spectrum up for success when they start in the job. And that happens weeks, sometimes months before, again, they start. As soon as that job offer is made, we start that new education piece with the employer. So I'd sit with the candidates and develop what I call an employment support plan, tailored specifically around them, really highlighting and pulling apart their strengths and, why they're such, valuable assets for that particular role. But we'll also have a really honest discussion about some potential challenges that they might face in the workplace. We'll also talk about their preferences, for example, and their communication preferences, their way in which they process information, and I design that up into an employment support plan. I'll then take that one step further and I'll turn that into an interactive training session specifically for their manager and the immediate team to ensure they know best how to support you. All those earlier stages about the training and awareness has been more general, more stereotypical about autism, but we all know that each and every individual on the spectrum is so completely different. That's why it's a spectrum. So making sure that we tailor that training specific to that individual onboarding is absolutely crucial. I also do onboarding training with the employers, and I've got a new version I'm now doing that's about onboarding remotely as well, because obviously for anyone, let alone for someone on the spectrum, there's definitely some barriers from that perspective as well. So we're still holding on to the hands of the employer and making sure they feel really, really confident to support their new employee that's going to be coming into the team. We also provide what we call ongoing enablement support. So we don't step away once we get to stage 5 and it's employment. We actually continue to engage with the employer for up to a 12-month period, sometimes perhaps longer, but on average about a 12-month period where we have one-to-one coaching and mentoring sessions with the employer to make sure they feel really equipped to understand and nurture and support their new employee. And we also have one-to-one sessions with the successful employee as well. And ideally, if there is any hiccups, if there's any challenges that come along the way, we workshop them, we implement strategies, and we make sure that we get on top of that straight away. And for the last 5 years, Specialisterne on average has had a 96% success rate measured at the 12-month mark. And I think it's because our process, it is a little longer. You can see here that from a time perspective, not just for the candidates, for the employer, it's a really long period of time. But because we spend so much time with that employer on that enablement, that capacity building, by the time we get to stage 5, they're feeling really confident. And hopefully, what Specialisterne wants to see eventually is that slowly we will fade away from the background and that this just becomes business as usual for these employers, that eventually, they won't need us in this capacity to run programs. Hopefully they'll actually do it themselves, but hopefully, via word of mouth, they'll recommend us, to other organisations out there, and we'll start to engage with them. But again, we're all in this together, and that's the only way we're going to hit that 1 million careers for individuals on the spectrum by 2030. And the support model. So I started to touch on that then, but our support model, again, is so incredibly crucial for success. And there's 2 different streams. So for the candidate that's come through our program, first of all, it is such a unique experience. Every attendee comments on the fact they've never been in an environment before where there's, 10 to 20 other individuals who are on the spectrum as well. It's just, you don't often find yourself in that type of environment. And that alone just becomes such a supportive, nurturing environment. And sometimes many say that's actually the highlight of coming through our programs, and you can establish those relationships and friendships with some of those peers in the program too. But obviously you have, if you're a candidate and you've been successfully offered a role, you have that Specialisterne connection via what I term as that ongoing enablement support piece, that coaching and mentoring for up to a 12-month period. We also make sure that you're connected with HR, and HR again have been with us every step of the way as far as that enablement and capacity building. We ensure that your manager is with you. We've got a supervisor. We have a buddy and mentoring program as well. We connect with your DES if you're with a disability employment service. Some candidates aren't, but they'd like to be. So we'll help establish that relationship if they'd like us to as well. We provide information on the EAP services, the employee assistance programs as well. And many of our candidates already set up with, a GP or a psychologist or psychiatrist as well. So you can see there's a huge, model of support from a candidate perspective over a long-term period. And then for the employer, again, it's just important. So they've obviously got that ongoing enablement piece with Specialisterne. but they've got that support from HR, which again is so, so crucial. They themselves can access the EAP, and they can also lean on their colleagues that have come through that program as well. So I think this model of support that we make sure is established right from the beginning, again, is so crucial towards that long-term success. All right, so the Specialisterne approach. So as I've said, it is completely different to the traditional recruitment process where we've flipped that on its head. So it is a little longer. As I said, our programs realistically, as far as from a candidate, are between 2 to 4 weeks, and we call them a unique, practical and patient approach. So again, I think that's why we do have that success rate of 96% over that 12-month period, because we do it slower. We do take the time to really ensure that we're matching the candidate to the right role within the organisations that we're working for. And coming through our programs as a candidate, we've got here, you're going to develop skills and confidence with like-minded people. You're going to establish social connections. You're going to be able to demonstrate your skills in a practical capacity to employers. And you're going to be assessed on skills that are relevant to the role. And you're also going to work with employers who understand and value, individuals on the spectrum in a neurodiverse workforce. And that training and assessment period. So as I said, that actual training and assessment period is normally about 2 to 4 weeks in duration. And it's not just that practical piece. I've obviously spoken a lot about the fact that candidates are engaged in practical activities that are relevant to the role. But another really important piece about this is that word training. We do provide our candidates with training. So there's also a series of workshops that are really relevant to them and helping to prepare them for the next stage if they are offered a role, with the employer. So understanding, communication in the workplace, understanding the written rules is huge, particularly if you've never worked before, social etiquette, workplace etiquette, all those different things are vital. My colleague Brett runs a fantastic session on role titles and actually breaking them down, because I don't know if you've found the same, but often role titles and what you think the role might be like, when you actually read a job description, it's completely different. And sometimes that can actually put you off applying for a job, but until you actually read down and drill into the role requirements, you go, oh, actually, I could do that. So we run a session as well on actually understanding what some of those different role titles means and what the skills are required for those roles. And as I said, we can now offer this program on-site or virtually, and I'm imagining perhaps in 21 it will be blended as organisations start to slowly transition back to the workplace in some capacity. I think we'll have 3 different models here, which is fantastic. And, for some individuals on the spectrum, they've absolutely loved the virtual environment. And for some individuals, they've missed the classroom component. So we're trying to make sure that we can get that right balance there as well. But as I said as well, so some of the practical activities that we might have candidates involved in. So historically, we'd always, relied on the Lego Mindstorm, coding and testing skills. But some other examples I've got listed here are analysing data sets using SQL, problem solving with business-specific scenarios. Try saying that fast. And candidates participate in individual and group tasks. And again, that's really important as well, because for some individuals that come through our program, they've always been very independent and perhaps haven't had the opportunity previously, or haven't been in a supportive environment when they've had to do group tasks. And we are at times pushing our candidates a little outside of their comfort zone. But we're still, helping them every step of the way as well. And it's so rewarding to be able to see the journey of some candidates that come through our program where they have, as I said, these amazing skills and capabilities, but lack confidence. And the idea, if we said early on, you're going to do group work, they might not even apply for our programs. But again, providing that supportive environment to make sure that they feel they can succeed is really, really rewarding. And we do have, as I said, individual tasks, group tasks where you come together. But the reality is that's what's going to be required in the workplace. As much as some roles may seem really independent, there's always still going to be a requirement at times for group work and vice versa. And I've said this many times, I know, but this is so important, that building the employer's awareness, the capacity building piece is vital towards this success. So we work really, really closely with the employers to ensure they know how to support and nurture individuals that come through our spectrum. So what does that look like? So as I said, it's a lot of training, different types of training, depending on the different stages that they're progressing to through their journey. We spend a lot of time as well focusing on the misconceptions. There's so many misconceptions out there, and Specialisterne in particular comes from what we call a strength-based approach as well. So education there is absolutely key. We discuss what some of the common challenges may look like, and we talk through some of the different strategies to assist. I've spoken as well about that tailored training. So once a candidate's offered the role, we spend quite a lot of time developing that individual support plan and also that tailored training session. And it's often about an hour and a half to 2 hours. So it's really, really detailed, but we want to make sure that we get that right. I mentioned as well briefly that we do have a buddy and mentoring program, and we are often absolutely inundated, which is fantastic from the component of often when we do some of these programs, particularly the mentor program, it might not necessarily be for someone within the candidate's immediate team, but it might be within the wider organisation. And I know my colleague Vicky often talks about the fact that when she ran a program initially with one of the big banks, they got absolutely inundated by applications of people that wanted to put their hand up and be a mentor. So much so I think they had 3 or 4 times too many. So some particular candidates who were actually lucky enough to have 2 mentors. But as I said earlier, these days everyone is connected with autism in some way, shape or form. And the brilliant piece is, and we'll talk about this a little bit later as well, is that it brings, having a neurodiverse workforce and individuals on the spectrum working within your team brings so many benefits. And you'll find that your colleagues feel really empowered themselves and excited to have you amongst their team. And those flow-on effects are absolutely wonderful. All right, so employer engagement. So I've spoken a lot about the fact that we've got to get the employers engaged, and we want to have the right individuals within the organisation involved as well. So as I said, with those training and assessment programs, those hiring managers are invited to lots of different components. Sometimes they're there every day, dropping in and out of those particular sessions, and it hasn't impacted whatsoever moving our programs online this year. We're making sure that the employers can see you demonstrate your skills in a practical capacity. So as I mentioned, they're going to get a report at the end that talks about it. But we want that just to be an add-on. We want them to see themselves with their own eyes and to experience in real time your skills, your strengths, and the value you could potentially bring to their team. And the benefit as well is that for you, if you've come through our program, you get to meet your potential team. You get to walk around and see the potential workspace, look at who perhaps your supervisor is going to be, and it puts some ownership on you to say, you know what, are you going to feel confident in this environment? Are you going to feel like you're going to thrive as well? And it creates that really unique situation where you, as a candidate, can actually turn the table and start to ask your employer some questions as well. And as I said, that's that reverse format of what a traditional recruitment interview might look like. And some of the employers we work with, so you might be wondering who we work with. The really exciting thing is we are getting some huge big name employers backing us at the moment, many of which are actually doing repeat programs as well. And that makes me happy because they can obviously see and have appreciated, the impact, that positive impact that, a neurodiverse workforce has had, that they're coming back from for previous, for continued programs. And I think that speaks volumes. You can see there at IBM, I showed you that little video earlier of Sam Castleman, and I'll speak a little bit later, but we're absolutely thrilled to be re-engaging with Westpac as well here in Sydney for a repeat program as well. And just this year, I led the New South Wales Public Service program as well, which was a pilot program, but in the end 14 candidates were offered roles. It was so exciting as well. I spoke earlier about the fact that we're starting to break outside of that mold with traditional IT focus. We had lab technician roles, there was finance roles, project management roles as well, and we've just had some amazing success. And those candidates that came through that program and were offered roles are just going from strength to strength. So the types of roles. So I've started to talk about that a little bit. So you can see here, for example, 3 domains that I've split this up into. So you've got the information technology, you've got the admin and professional, and then you've got agriculture. So I'm not sure if you're familiar, but one of our first programs we actually did was at the Sunport Farm in a piggery, which again is so completely different to IT. And I think sometimes people forget that as well. And, I'm really, really excited to say that in 2021, we've got some really, really exciting programs coming up, and again, really expanding outside of that IT space as well, which is really amazing. But from 2015, we've already placed over 400 candidates. And interestingly, as I said, that huge piece on that employer capacity building, we've trained over 4,500 managers. And I probably shouldn't say managers, but teams, that should be as well. And as I said, that retention rate as well, so 96% success rate measured at the 12-month mark as well. All right, so the exciting part. So neurodiversity as a competitive advantage. So you can obviously see through my own passion, I know this, I live and I breathe this, and I absolutely love, as I said earlier, when the employers I'm engaging with have that light bulb moment. I've been working in this space now for about coming up to 8 years, and when I first started, it was completely different. I spent a lot of time on the phone, emails, door knocking, trying to get employers at the time to listen, to let me tell them a little bit more about the benefits of, accessing autistic talent and the benefits it's going to bring to the workforce. But in the last few years, we've seen this shift, and now it's the opposite. We actually have employers coming to us wanting to engage with us because they genuinely can see the value and also that competitive business edge to accessing autistic talent as well. But as I said, that huge piece for us is about breaking that stigma. So I think why perhaps many employers have been a little bit hesitant in the past to engage is just because of the fact that there is still a little bit of stigma, if we're completely honest. We've obviously come such a long way. And as I said, for me personally, just looking at, say, the last 8 years, but I'm obviously very aware that we still have such a long way to go. But I think such a huge piece there is that awareness, that capacity building piece as well. And I do genuinely think that we're on the rise and that we're making a difference, which is so incredibly exciting. So the benefits of a neurodiverse workforce. So I touched on this a little bit again earlier, but, when I write those employment support plans with those successful candidates, a lot of what we talk about is their preferred communication preference and the way in which they process information. And if you think about it, for the average neurotypical person, that's exactly the same as well. We all have different ways in which we prefer to communicate. I know for me, for example, I'm a texter on my phone. I much prefer to text. It's quick. I can then go off and do other things. Whereas on the flip side, my husband, he calls. He never texts. He's like, why would you text when you can call? He likes that connection from that perspective. We're all completely different. And that's the same in the workplace. An example I often give is the fact that for some of us, so if we think perhaps in a pre-COVID world, where we were still in the office environment, some of us might naturally, even if someone's only a few seats away, rather than get up off our seat and walk around and ask them a question, we might send an email, or perhaps they're on the floor up, we might pick up the phone. Everyone has a different way in which they communicate. That's their natural preference. And I spoke earlier as well about the fact that having a fantastic supportive manager is that crucial piece of success. And it's the same thing. Many managers are already doing this without realizing that they're actually understanding that each member of their team is unique and different, and is going to have a preferred way to communicate, a preferred way on how they process information. And it's just, often managers do it without realizing, but sometimes they need a little bit of a reminder. So the positive effect is you're not just improving, I guess, the onboarding experience for that neurodiverse new member of the team, but there's actually going to be those flow-on effects, and it might trigger for the manager, wow, let me actually have a think about all my team and their preferred method of communication. It often costs absolutely nothing to make some small tweaks and changes to make sure that members of your team feel really supported. And the engagement side, so fosters engagement, and you get these focused and proficient workers as well. I find that a lot of the candidates that come through our program, I should say, have a very strong hyper-focus. They're very diligent. They're very hardworking. Many of the candidates that come through our program are so incredibly grateful for this opportunity as well, that we end up seeing, very low absenteeism. Sometimes they've got to be sent home when they're sick because they don't want to let anyone down, and they're here. You've got this really loyal, this really honest employee as well. I often say to managers, one of the benefits to, working with individuals on the spectrum is that quite frequently they are very honest and very direct. And I think from the flip side and the positive I love taking from that as well is sometimes if perhaps a manager was to ask a neurotypical individual for their opinion on something, particularly if they're new and they've only just joined an organisation, perhaps they might be a little bit hesitant to provide their honest feedback. Whereas I always say to the hiring managers I work with, very early on, ask the candidates that are starting and new to your team, ask them what they thought about your onboarding process. Where were the gaps? What would they do differently when they're reading, documentation and processes as part of their induction? Again, ask them those same questions. And what would you do differently if this was you? And again, we often see these amazing thoughts and processes taking place because we know that many individuals on the spectrum have unique problem solving. They have this out of the box thinking and they'll come at things from a different direction. And again, that's so positive because sometimes, and like I said earlier, we can relate to this with Specialisterne. We were doing our program somewhat the same for a long time, and it wasn't until COVID came and we were forced to innovate. We've come up with these amazing new exciting programs and so forth. And I think sometimes from a work perspective, it can be similar in that we just do things because that's what we're told and that's what our colleague did when they were in this role and that flow-on effect. But it's not until you actually challenge that and come from that different perspective that you can see some really amazing and exciting, innovative thinking as well. And autistic strengths. So hopefully if you're on today's call and perhaps you're on the spectrum yourself, I hope that you're already aware of some of the amazing strengths that you have. Now, as I said earlier, for many individuals that are coming through our programs, for some of them, they absolutely don't really have any idea of what their strengths are. As I said earlier, some perhaps suffer from imposter syndrome, and it's not until we start to talk it through and actually say, what you've just done there, that's pretty amazing, and not everyone can do that. These are just, again, some stereotypical examples of some of the common autistic strengths. But again, I'm not saying that this is relevant to each and every individual who's on the spectrum. But, that attention to detail we often find is fantastic. That thoroughness, that ability to hyper-focus on a job and just to get it done and to see it through in the end. Sometimes that ability to do repetitive tasks over and over again, or to look for gaps and issues, from a testing perspective, for example. That unique thought process, these days as well, can go such a long, long way. And I love that bottom point in the middle there, creativity. In the last year or so, I have come across the most amazing, highly creative individuals. And when you marry that with the right role as well, you can see some absolutely exceptional results. And this slide here, I always include this because I like just getting people thinking about the fact that there are so many perhaps famous or familiar faces who are on the spectrum as well. And some of them might jump out to you straight away. But I think this gives a really broad snapshot of the fact that some of these individuals, their career pathway, so to speak, and what they're famous for is so completely unique and different. We've got individuals that have created amazing cartoons and television series. We've got some comedians in here, and Hannah Gatsby, for example, you might be familiar with, but just often talks really openly and honestly about the fact that she did have her diagnosis of being on the spectrum later in life, and the journey for her and that pathway. Greta Thunberg as well there. Some really interesting faces, but each and every one of these individuals has made such a positive impact on society. And I want to leave that with you as well. And just to make sure that you never feel pigeonholed, so to speak, to know that there's so many different avenues and options for you to explore, and that your strengths really are of value to employers if we get that role match right, that cultural fit right as well. Right, so I've mentioned we spend so much time trying to shift the perspective of employers, and that's often, as I said before, about the fact that they're, perhaps got, there's a little bit of a stigma perhaps attached to autism, or they've missed that education piece. So what we do is try and teach them to flip that perspective. And, that one of those very first slides I talked about today is the dandelion, and that perception that perhaps so many people, they look at a dandelion as a weed, whereas in fact it's actually a very, very valuable herb, and it is actually appreciated in many countries and has some amazing use as well. And I certainly encourage you, if you have some time, maybe later today or in the week, Google the dandelion and read about some of those amazing effects, and it will make you rethink a lot of things about shifting your perspective and your initial thought processes. And that goes the same, when we're working with individuals on the spectrum. I've often heard statements, from individuals like, that person's really blunt and rude. But we need to actually flip that and think about it from a different perspective. So perhaps someone that might be a little bit blunt, it's actually can be a strength. It's about having, honesty. As I said earlier, you can ask someone that's on the spectrum, what's your thought on this? And you're going to get a really honest answer. And I think that can have some amazing flow-on effects. As I said, it might help businesses to actually rethink some of their traditional processes as well. You know, someone might come across as a little bit obsessive, but again, they are really dedicated and passionate about the work that they're doing, and they're often going to make sure that they complete that work by when it's due to a really exceptional detail as well. Perhaps some individuals on the spectrum might come across as, perhaps being a loner and prefer to be on their own. And again, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And often those individuals really thrive working independently, which not everyone can do either. And again, in the workplace, and now more than ever, we're in this COVID type world where we are perhaps working remotely, that ability to be able to work independently is absolute gold. So again, I just want you to start to challenge your own thought processes as well about thinking about some of the different strengths that you have and what that value might be within the workplace. I don't know if you have a pen and paper handy, and again, if not, perhaps you can, put it into your brain, lock it away for later and have a think about this. But as I said, I really do think it's important that you start to genuinely believe and recognise your own strengths. And that's going to be vital in your own personal next stages of seeking employment as well. Whether you come through a specialist type program or if you go off through the traditional recruitment process, you're always going to need to be able to sell your strengths. And I think that comes from genuinely appreciating and knowing their value. So I've got a little bit of a chart here. So I've got in the left-hand corner positive characteristics. So some of the positive characteristics some individuals on the spectrum might have may include being reliable, attention to detail, methodical approach, perseverance, and independent. And again, I've just got some examples. Obviously, this is a very, very small example, and the opportunities are endless from that perspective. But if we think again about the fact that, you might consider yourself very reliable. If you're asked to do something, you always see it through. And that type of characteristic and strength is absolutely suitable for all jobs. I've never met an employer or a hiring manager that said, I don't want someone reliable. Being reliable is crucial for all jobs and all domains. And why? Because it helps to build trust, loyalty, and displays a strong work ethic. Another example might be, I've got here methodical approach. So an example might be something like risk and compliance. And again, I often find many individuals I support who are on the spectrum can be quite rigid in their thinking. They can be quite black and white. And again, sometimes those types of traits, if matched the right job, can be amazing because you're given a task and you're told to do X, Y, and Z. You're going to do X, Y, and Z, and you're going to follow that process as required. And I think that's brilliant. If you think about the types of roles that might be suitable, perhaps something like auditing, risk and compliance, where it is so vital to not miss a step and to be really detailed and methodical in your approach. And another one here, I've got just one more example, is perseverance. So an example I've got here, perhaps software testing, where you have that ability to perform repetitive tasks over and over again, where you're looking for errors, you're trying to problem solve from that perspective. You might also have doing that a really strong hyper focus where you can't get distracted. You've got to stay really, really focused. And again, amazing flow-on effects in the workplace as well. And you're showing that you're able to perform repetitive tasks, that you have a strong work ethic, and also a commitment to quality and accuracy of work. So I might just give, maybe 1 minute time now. If you do, as I said, have a pen and paper, or if you just want to even just shut your eyes and think about it in your head. But I'd love if you just had a think and ideally maybe could list 3 of your own personal strengths. And perhaps this is even an opportunity to utilise the chat function. I unfortunately can't see it when I'm presenting, but some of the different NDCOs that are online today certainly can. And, I'd love for you perhaps, to punch it into the chat, and you can come up with 3 strengths and positive characteristics that you have. And I'll stop talking just for a moment and give you some time to have a little bit of a reflection and a think about that. All right, so hopefully some of you have had a chance to perhaps type that into the chat box. Once I'm finished presenting, I'll certainly have a read back through that myself. For some of you, it might be really challenging. You know, some of you might have been able to think of your strengths straight away. And for some of you, you might have gone, wow, this is really difficult. And if you're one of those individuals that has found that really difficult, I think this is something that I'd really encourage you to reflect on later. There's, thanks to the wonders of technology, there's some absolutely brilliant free online, tools that you can use as well. Some of the ones you might have heard of, the Jung methodology, I think it's called, or Jung typology test, human metrics, that type of thing. If you put that into Google and do a search, there's some brilliant tests, and they'll ask you a series of questions to understand more about yourself, and then it will suggest some different types of jobs that might be suitable to you, along with, it will draw out from answering those questions where you'd actually see some of your strengths and skills from that perspective. So certainly encourage you to think and explore that a little bit further as well. All right, so I've got one more video now. Fingers crossed it works. We'll just see. All right, so disclosure in the workplace. So for some of you, if you do end up being successful, whether you've come through Specialisterne or if you've sought employment, your own employment pathway, you may come to a part where you've got to consider if you want to disclose the fact that you are on the spectrum as well. I should point out that if you do come through a Specialisterne program, that disclosure is actually part of the essential requirements, because as I said, we've spent so much time with the employers. They appreciate, they are supportive, and that's just something that's really important. Obviously, we don't disclose to the broader organisation, but your manager and your immediate team are going to know that you're on the spectrum, and that's all part of making sure we have that supportive network and that we have that education piece surrounding that. But as I said, if you come through an alternative pathway, you might make it all the way through and actually offered a job, and then you might come to the point where you're thinking about, should you disclose? And for some of you, perhaps you may be considering whether or not you want to disclose the fact that you're on the spectrum or that you're neurodiverse a little earlier, perhaps once you've been invited to an interview. So we're just going to discuss that in a little bit more detail. So the National Autistic Society recommended that you tell your employer for three main reasons. So equality legislation gives employers the duty to make reasonable adjustments to the recruitment processes in the workplace. If reasonable adjustments are put in place, you are likely to be more successful at work and will probably find work less stressful. If colleagues know you're on the spectrum, they are likely to be more understanding, which will help you to build better relationships. So you might be thinking about when to disclose. So in general, a good time to disclose that you're on the spectrum might be when you need to ask for a reasonable accommodation. This can be when you know that there is something in the workplace that is preventing you from competing for a job or performing a job well. But you can disclose to an employer at any time. And it is really, really important for me to point out that you do not have to disclose. It's absolutely not an obligation. It's a completely personal thing and up to you. But this is just about providing you with some insight and some awareness and the fact that you are absolutely within your right to do so. So how to disclose? So if you are applying for roles that do not have a disability recruitment pathway, then you may need to educate potential employers and interviewers on how autism shapes you. So some different things to perhaps consider is, what should an employer or interviewer need to know? So do they need to know about some of your strengths? Perhaps you might also want to educate them about some of the difficulties that you might experience in the workplace, and also to provide them with some strategies that may work. So I've got just an example here of a disclosure statement. So I'll just read this. I have autism, which affects the way that I communicate and interact with others. The main effect that this has on me is that I have difficulty with understanding some non-verbal body language and making eye contact. In the interview, I may not look the interviewer in the eye as much as I should, but this does not mean that I'm not focusing on what they're saying. I can also find it hard to judge how much information to give. It would be helpful if the interviewer could ask clear questions and let me know when I've said enough. My autism also brings many strengths. My attention to detail makes me very efficient and accurate in my work. I am also very passionate and hardworking. I have attached some fact sheets about autism for your information. So that's obviously just one example, but I like the fact that you're providing, I guess, in itself, some awareness and some education for the employer through that letter. So you're not creating a problem, you're providing solutions and showcasing the strengths that you have, which is so very important. And again, I know I've said it many times, but I want you to walk away today understanding the strengths that you have are wanted, are needed by employers at the moment, and that we are starting to see this rise in employers building their awareness and their understanding about supporting and nurturing and accessing in time, an autistic workforce. So explaining your autism. So consider the following statements when describing your needs, strengths, and adjustments. So some examples I've got here are, I have a disability which affects the way I communicate and interact with others. This means that I have strengths in certain areas, and these are, and that's where you might then provide some insight into some of your strengths. You could also say, this also means that I may have difficulty with, and perhaps there you can provide some examples of some of the areas where you might experience some challenges. You can say, there are some simple adjustments which would be helpful in an interview, and these are. And finally, in the workplace, there are some simple adjustments that would be helpful, these are. And go through that as well. So you're providing some adjustments for the interview process, but you're also providing some adjustments for what that might look like in the workplace as well. And I can guarantee you that they're going to be very grateful for the fact that you're assisting them, and particularly if they've not had that education and awareness piece just yet. So the next step, so as I said, for some of you, perhaps you have finished your studies or you're coming towards the end of your studies and you are starting to think quite seriously about that pathway to employment. So my recommendations are, in a 3-step process here. So step 1, research businesses that either have disability and inclusion programs or connect with organisations such as Specialisterne. Consider how your strengths can help businesses achieve its goal. Identify and promote those strengths. Remember to include all skills obtained, including through self-learning and volunteer work. And step 3, identify people who work in similar roles or sectors. See if you can meet with them, email them, or connect with LinkedIn to find out more about their work. And some of the types of questions you might ask them if you are successful in connecting with them are, what does a typical day involve? What do you like about your job? What are some of the challenges? What experience and qualifications did you have before you started the role? All right. And I did also mention the fact that Specialisterne is currently in the recruitment phase for one of our programs. So if you weren't already aware, we are currently looking for individuals on the spectrum who might be looking for some roles. Some of the different roles we have available are business and financial analysts, cybersecurity, surveillance analysts, and infrastructure engineers. Applications close for this particular program next Tuesday at 2 p.m. sharp. So I certainly encourage you, if you weren't yet aware or if you're planning to put in an application to get started. The 2 essential criteria for us is 1, that you do have an autism diagnosis, and 2, that you are an Australian residency, that you do have the right to work here in Australia. It is Sydney-based, so we are ideally looking for individuals who are based within a commutable distance of the Sydney CBD. But again, as a result of COVID, you would be at least initially perhaps working remotely. So if you are not in the Sydney CBD area or in a commutable distance, if you are interested but are willing to relocate, if you were successful, then I'd still encourage you to explore this particular opportunity. And we do also have some really exciting, we've got a massive back end of this year, actually, nationwide. We're actually going to be engaging with another large federal government agency, and we've got multiple roles across multiple states. So I'm not in a position to provide too much more information on that just yet. But again, if you're not already, I strongly encourage you to follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, or Twitter. Go to our Specialisterne Australia website and subscribe to our mailing list, and that will ensure that you're amongst the first to find out about these programs when we do launch them. There we go. And that brings us to the question and answer section now. So I might just put up one more screen before we get started in that question and answer section. So I've obviously spoken a little bit today about the fact that we are active on a few different social media platforms there. That very bottom link where there's a little dandelion logo, that is actually the mailing list link. But in saying that, as I said, you can just go straight to the Specialisterne Australia website, and there is on that landing page a little message that will say, do you want to subscribe to our mailing list? If you click that, that will also take you straight through to that mailing list subscription page as well, if you haven't got the time to scribble that down right now. And you can also see my contact details as well, my email address at Specialisterne, and I'm also quite active on LinkedIn as well. So certainly feel free to look me up on LinkedIn and to connect with me. And yeah, I'd love to get to know you a little bit more. And hopefully, if you are on the spectrum and are looking for work, hopefully we'll connect later this year or perhaps next year through one of our upcoming programs. And on that note, I might stop sharing my screen and we will do some question and answer. Fantastic.
Yeah, thanks, Kate. Really interesting to hear about, the work that you're doing and Specialisterne are doing. So many different aspects, I suppose, from building employer awareness of the neurodiverse talent pool and, working towards that global goal of meaningful employment. Really interesting hearing you present. And
Yes.
I know Sam, something that he touched upon in one of his films was just sort of, that sense of embracing who you are. So looking at things through that strength-based lens, I think is really important. And I hope everyone enjoyed that exercise where Kate did ask you to consider some of your strengths and some of the qualities that you have. From the conversation, there's been a lot of questions and comments that have come through in the chat box. I know, Kate, you mentioned earlier, for any that we don't have a chance to get through today, that you have sort of told us already that you'd be happy to receive those questions and put some responses together for us. So thank you in advance. But also thank you everyone for putting in your questions as well. There's been some really great stuff coming through. Kate, I'm just going to get straight into it if it's okay.
Yeah, brilliant. Fire away.
So a couple that came through via email. So we had a comment and a question. So I've been diagnosed with ASD. I'm 41. Can you help me find my tribe? So this person has indicated that they've worked throughout their life, but with many gaps and many dismissals that are now more explainable, and they're wanting to move forward. So I'm wondering if there's any tips or advice that you might be able to offer.
Yeah, fantastic. So I'm sorry to hear that you've had some hurdles and some challenges along the way, but hopefully the positive through those negative experiences, that you've learned a little bit more about yourself, that you've perhaps learned a little bit more about the environment in which you're going to thrive. And one thing that I always try and support candidates to is to really, as I've said at the moment, to understand where your strengths lie, to be able to actually articulate perhaps where those challenges might be. And I think these days, as I said, we've got these programs, whether it's Specialisterne or there's some other like-minded organisations that offer similar services as well. But I think when you are able to come through a program like that, there's so much awareness and capacity building for yourself too. It's not just on the employer, but I think you walk away actually having a little bit more appreciation about your own self-worth. And unfortunately, in many instances, we do see that individuals on the spectrum don't necessarily flourish in certain work environments because there's not the right support in place. And I showed that model earlier about that overall model of support and the fact that there's not one layer, there's multiple layers in the Specialisterne approach. And regardless of whether you come through Specialisterne, you've said, how do I find my tribe? And I don't think it's a super simple answer from that perspective. I don't know if you mean, from a social network perspective or just in general with your direction from an employment perspective as well. But, if it is about just in general also, being with like-minded individuals on the spectrum, obviously the pro for coming through our programs is you're suddenly in this very unique cohort of individuals, and I'm often told that they'll stay in touch post our programs. But LinkedIn, for example, there's some amazing groups online for individuals on the spectrum, and I know some people get really into those online groups, and you can share your thoughts, feelings, experiences. There's some amazing programs, social groups. I know Social Adventures, for example, Carolyn Smith is leading those. I think they're here in Sydney and also up in the Brisbane area as well, where you can make social connections outside of the workplace with other individuals on the spectrum. And I think the more we embrace the fact that we're on the spectrum and we don't see it as just a label, but as part of who we are, and that we ourselves become advocates. And I think just having open communication, you'd be very surprised at how many people are actually on the spectrum. I know for myself, whenever I conduct that tailored manager training I spoke about earlier, or even the autism awareness training, guarantee pretty much every time someone will come to this question and answer section at the end and put up their hand and go, and is brave enough to say, you know what, I've just realised I'm on the spectrum. I'm in my 30s, 40s, and I've never realised, but everything you've just said to me makes sense. I have other individuals who have been diagnosed and they're very aware they're on the spectrum, but they've never felt the courage to disclose before. And I think that's really important too. So my advice would be to start to understand yourself a little bit more, understand the brilliant ways in which you connect with autism yourself so that you can sell your strengths. Start to have the confidence to have these open communications, and you might be just surprised how many people already within perhaps your network are on the spectrum. And I wish you all the very best, and I hope from an employment perspective that perhaps, if you're not already, connect with us and hopefully somewhere, depending on where you're based in Australia, we're running programs particularly in the Queensland area, New South Wales, ACT, South Australia and Victoria. So I hope, fingers crossed, you're in one of those states, and who's to say we're not going to expand further within Australia, but hopefully at some stage you can come through one of our programs, or you can take that advice I mentioned earlier about doing some research into other organisations that have these specific pipelines and that are putting their hand up and really wanting to do the right thing. Brilliant organisations such as AND as well, the Australian Network on Disability, might be a starting point to start doing some research as well.
Thanks for that, Kate. I think, you've mentioned a lot of, like, for example, A&D, other programs and other things that Specialisterne are doing. So we will send through to everyone the links following the session today, as well as the video as well.
Yeah, sorry about that.
All good. It's always the way with technology. Don't worry at all, but we'll send it through to everyone. And just that emphasis that you've sort of said again around really getting to know who you are and your strengths. And I think that's such a important self-reflection process. So something that I hope everybody does take away with from the session today. Now, just in terms of some of the other questions that came through. So some of these are comments with questions, and I think that's really great. So thanks everyone for jumping in with all of this. So the comment is, it's good to hear that you're expanding beyond IT. My son is 33, diagnosed at 24. He has an honours degree, which is research-based, and he is also listening to the session as well, so welcome to you. He has applied for over 200 jobs and still no work, so needs to build his stamina, as it's hard not having structure or routine or purpose. So maybe part-time work to begin with. Is that something that's possible?
Yeah, so I can, firstly, thank you for tuning into today's session, and I'm so sorry to hear about the fact that 200 applications, it blows my mind, and I wish I could say that's the first time I've heard that, but it's not uncommon. And again, this is why we need these employers to continue to connect with us and that continued awareness for employers, because they're missing out on, you've got an honours degree and I'm sure such an amazing asset to so many employers. And I really hope that we can, whether it's through Specialisterne or somewhere else, try and help you from that perspective. But, your confidence from that perspective, I can imagine, and for many individuals, we're aware as well that being on the spectrum, it's a comorbid condition. There are mental health conditions and perhaps other disabilities attached as well. So, I encourage you not to lose sight and to remember that you do have some absolutely amazing qualities. To answer your question, speaking at least from a Specialisterne perspective, we actually do promote a lot of part-time and flexibility, and that's part of that coaching piece with our employers, for them to actually understand why that's so important. I do a lot of education about helping them to understand what autistic masking looks like, and the fact that some individuals may experience autistic burnout and ways in which we can minimise that. And for some individuals, that means even initially, I had some candidates that went through our PSC program, for example, that gradually built up their hours. For many candidates that come through our program, they've never worked before. And I think it'd be really, unprofessional on my behalf to throw people directly into full-time work. I want to see people succeed. So part of that's on me as well. So I make a educated judgment from that perspective about whether or not, I have candidates tell me I'll work full-time 100% because they are so desperate for a job. But if I genuinely don't think that's going to be great for you on many levels, and I'll never put someone into a full-time job. I'll do my very, very best to work with that employer to negotiate some flexibility. It may be permanent part-time work. In other instances, I've just had someone recently commence who's starting off on 3 days a week for a period of weeks and then gradually building to 4. And then we're going to assess at that point whether they can then jump to 5 or if we keep it at 4. And I think, again, that's where that awareness piece, and 9 times out of 10, the employers are really, happy to do that. And statistics show as well that many individuals on the spectrum actually outperform, from a productivity perspective, their fellow neurotypical peers. So often we find that you can get through the 5-day work in 4 days anyway. So from a part-time perspective, don't let that stop you. I think it's completely acceptable and very manageable these days. And I'm seeing a lot more employers embrace and understand that.
Absolutely. And all right, I think some good pointers there, Kate, as well. Now, I'm just conscious of the time and we've got some really great questions, so I'm going to move into the next one. One is a question with regards to whether you've seen a lot of women coming through the Specialisterne program.
Yeah, fantastic question. So something close to my heart, I must say. Again, as I mentioned earlier, I've been working in this space for almost 8 years, and originally very few and far between encountering individuals on the spectrum that are female. Just literally within the last 2 years, seeing a massive rise in female applications. I'm seeing a lot of, a high increase of females on the spectrum being diagnosed later in life. We actually had someone come through our recent program as well, who only had a diagnosis about a month before, and someone said, "Hey, have you heard of Specialisterne?" And she's it was a huge learning curve for her, but the most exceptional skills. And she said, "Oh my God, suddenly everything made sense once she had that diagnosis," and the skills that are her particular strengths, and she's now utilizing those in that role. I still, if I'm honest, don't see enough females applying for our program, but I'm definitely seeing an uphill trend, which I think is brilliant. And I hope that just that broader education and awareness piece, that obviously a lot of females are currently underrepresented. So I hope a lot more females start to, perhaps if they are looking for it, get diagnosed and start to understand themselves a little bit better. And often that's all it is. It's not a label. It's just about understanding yourself and having a few extra pieces of the puzzle come together. I know for this Westpac program that I'm currently recruiting for, I'm really excited to say I've had some really strong female candidates come through. I know when I did my Facebook Live, I did a little shout out to the females as well that are on the spectrum, and my colleague Vicky and I are doing another Facebook Live this afternoon actually. So if you're interested to hear about Westpac, jump on Facebook, but definitely I want to see more females coming through, and I'm pleased to say they're coming, but I want to see more.
That's great. Thanks, Kate. And I wonder actually if we can pop in the chat box as well, the Facebook link, so that others can join that this afternoon.
Sure, I can certainly try and track that out enough of my head, unfortunately.
Now, just in terms of the timing, we are only with a couple of minutes left, and I know that there's a few questions which are all excellent questions. Kate, I'm going to send them through to you. And what we'll do is we'll shoot through to everyone an email just with a summary from today. The recording will be available as well over the next couple of days. And then certainly we'll have contact details as well for everyone to get in touch. You might even have some questions that come up after today. So if that's the case, please do send them through as well. We very much welcome them. I do want to take this opportunity to obviously thank you, Kate, for joining us this morning / this afternoon now. It's been a great session, and I think lots of valuable information, lots of tips lots of resources as well that, that have been discussed. Whilst that brings us to the end of the session today, I am actually going to very quickly invite my lovely colleague, Caroline, who is next week with the Pathways to Employability series. Caroline has been putting together a careers fair. And so this is the last session of the Pathways to Employability series and will be a really great opportunity for you each, if you're available, to come and connect and engage directly with employers. So Caroline, when you're ready, just pop your camera on, and if you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about the careers fair.
Hi, thank you very much. Okay, well, I've got it written down, so I might be looking down every now and again. But so next Wednesday is our Pathways to Employability Careers Fair. It's an online fair. You can register by clicking in the link that will come into the chat box just now. And we'll also be sending email details on as to how you can register for the fair very shortly. It'll include 15 employers from a range of different organisations and at different industries as well, government, corporate employers. And each of these employers are interested in linking with university graduates who can bring a diverse range of skills and life experiences to their roles. So for employers, they're going to be using this event to promote themselves as an employer of choice and to also talk about the amazing initiatives and things that they have going for their employees. But for uni students and alumni, it is an opportunity for you to make direct contact with employers, to ask them any questions that you might have about working in their company, about how to put your best foot forward in interviews, about what they're looking for in candidates, about their workplace culture. You might even want to ask them about special programs for women or for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. So there's a lot of questions that you might want to ask employers too. The event is expo style, meaning that when you log in, you'll see lots of different tiles, each with the employers' logos, and you can simply click in to go in and speak with the employers, and then you can pop out and go and see other employers too. So from the link that's just in the chat box now, you can see a list of the employers that are going to be coming to the event, so you can start to prepare. And there's also a link in the chat box that will give you a range of suggestions. There's also a little video you can watch about how you can best prepare to actually attend the event. So you might want to organise some pre-arranged questions, or to have your resume on hand, or to think about a few different things. This will give you some prompts as to how to best prepare for the expo. And upon registration, you're going to be asked your name. It's not mandatory to provide even your real name. It's certainly not mandatory to provide your surname. So we're hoping that that will give you full confidence to be able to ask whatever questions you like of the employers. And I'd really encourage you to take this unique opportunity. It is open to all university students with disability from across Australia. And like I said, you will see some quite big employers who do make it their business to hire graduates for their roles. So please register, please come, and please, feel free to ask whatever questions you might like. Thank you.
Thanks, Caroline. So hopefully you might be able to join us next week as well for the careers fair. And certainly in the meantime, if you have any questions, do check in. You've probably all received emails from me over the past couple of weeks about Pathways to Employability. So do connect if you have a question. Kate, I really just want to take a moment to thank you for being with us today and for presenting, and of course for the work that you and the broader work that Specialisterne are doing as well. Thank you very much. Thank you also to Sula, our captioner. It's been a pleasure having you as well with us today. I hope that everyone does have a wonderful day ahead. And Kate, any final words or tips before we start?
I just want to say, to you, Jessica, obviously, thank you so much for this opportunity. I absolutely love what I do, and I'm so grateful when I have, the number of attendees that are coming today. And I hope that together, we're all in this together, really, as I said, with that 1 million careers. We've got to do this by helping to break that stigma, to celebrate the strengths. And I guess if you're on the spectrum yourself, to talk about it, to educate people and promote from that perspective. I hope that for people sitting in today, that perhaps some of our upcoming programs are suitable to you. And as Jessica said, please feel free to contact me, reach out, introduce yourself. And I hope down the path we can connect. So thank you. I really appreciated this opportunity today.
Thanks so much, Kate, and thanks everyone for being here with us. Have a wonderful day ahead, and hopefully we'll all connect again soon.
Thank you. Bye.